Hello, thanks for joining me for Great Personalities of the Bible. When you were a child, did you ever sing the song Joshua at the Battle of Jericho? I did too. In fact, it's one of my favorite childhood memories. Well, today in session 1, our LifeView group leader, Robbie White, is going to take you through a study of Joshua, a Valiant leader.
Hi, today we're going to talk a little bit about Joshua. There's not a lot known about Joshua's early life. We do know that he was born a slave of the tribe of Ephraim. But he was chosen to be a valiant leader for the Israelites during their exodus from Egypt to the land of Canaan, also known as the Promised Land. Now, it's believed Joshua was about 40 years old when they left Egypt. But that is not really set in stone. This was just one of the commentators I read said he was about 40, going by his age at his death. Now, there are some scholars also that describe Joshua as a type of Jesus due to some parallels that can be made between the two. Now, one I'll give you first right now is their names. The Hebrew name for Joshua is Yehoshua, and the Hebrew name for Jesus is Yeshua. But the Greek name for both is Joshua. Now, near the end, I'll touch on a couple of others later. But we're introduced to Joshua in Exodus chapter 17, where according to some Jewish manuscripts, he was named Hosea or Hoshea. Now, I'll use Joshua just to keep any confusion down. And his story in the Bible starts not long after the crossing of the Red Sea, where the Israelites are attacked by the Amalekites. And Joshua is selected by Moses to lead the counterattack. Now, we're not really told why Moses selected Joshua. Out of the more than 1 million people who left Egypt, for some reason Joshua might have been a friend of Moses. He might have been familiar with him while they were in Egypt, or it might have been just because God told Moses to select Joshua. But anyway, they led the counterattack against the Amalekites, and they defeated them. Then from that point on, Joshua assumed the role of the assistant and protege of Moses. And after this defeat, God said to Moses, "Write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." Now, the interesting thing about this is even some 40 years before Joshua became the leader of the Israelites, God was already preparing him. Joshua had no idea he would be in that role, and we don't have any indication that Moses even knew. And the next time Joshua is mentioned is in chapter 24, where the Israelites are at Sinai. Now, we all know the story there, the 10 Commandments. And when Moses went up the mountain to talk with God, Joshua went with him part of the way. Then he waits there for 40 days and 40 nights. And because of that, when he came down with Moses, he was not with the Israelites and not involved in the sin of the golden calf, which is told to us in Exodus chapter 32. Then in chapter 33, we're told something that kind of intrigued me, and I want to read it to you and talk about it just a little bit. It's Exodus chapter 33, verses 7 through 11. Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people would rise up, and each would stand at his tent door and watch Moses until he had gone into the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. And when all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise up and worship, each at his tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses turned again into the camp, his assistant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. Now this really interested me. I don't believe there's anything that's in the Bible that's by accident. For some reason, God wanted us to know this. But I started digging and said, we're not told why Joshua wouldn't depart from the tent. But after researching Joshua, I come up with two possible reasons. Now, one of these could be correct or neither one. I could be way off base on both of them, but I'm just going to throw it out there. The first is that since the tent of meeting was outside the camp, it wouldn't be as protected as it would have been inside. So Joshua may have stayed to guard or protect the tent. And the other reason, it may be a little far-fetched, but we'll see if it makes sense. It says, as I said here at the beginning, Joshua was considered by some as a type of Jesus, or foreshadowing of Jesus, ever how you want to put it. But in Luke chapter 2 is the account of the 12-year-old Jesus getting separated from Joseph and Mary after the feast of the Passover. Mary and Joseph, with a group of people, were heading back to Nazareth from Jerusalem when they realized that Jesus wasn't with them. And when they went back to search for him, they found him in the temple. Mary says to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" Like I said, it's a little far-fetched, but this could have been Joshua's reason also. He needed to be in his father's tent. So after about 2 years, the Israelites left Sinai and eventually arrived in the wilderness of Paran. Now when I was looking at this, 2 years, I never realized they spent that long there. But, with the instructions Moses was given by God for the construction of the tabernacle, that wasn't built overnight, so I finally realized why it had taken so long. But anyway, when you get to the wilderness of Paran, which is right across, close to Canaan, that's where the 12 men, there was one from each tribe, were sent to spy out Canaan. Now we're all familiar with the account of this in the Bible. After 40 days, the spies returned to make their reports, but only Joshua and Caleb reported that the inhabitants could be defeated. It was at this time that Moses called Hosea Joshua, changing his name from "He saves" to Yahweh or God saves. And of the 12 spies, Joshua and Caleb were the only ones to survive. And according to Numbers chapter 14, were the only ones over the age of 20 at that time of the Israelites to enter the promised land. Now Joshua, he continued to be Moses' assistant until just before the Israelites crossed the Jordan River to enter the Promised Land. And as we know, Moses had sinned, and God told him that he would not enter the land, but he would let him see it. Now, before he died, Moses chose Joshua to succeed him as the leader of Israel. And when God commissioned Joshua, he told him, "Be strong and courageous." He repeated this at least 3 more times in the first chapter of the book of Joshua. And this suggests to me that Joshua's courage, bravery, valiance, ever how you want to put it, came from his complete trust in God. So then next we go into where the Israelites cross the Jordan River and they're getting ready to prepare for battle against Jericho. But before the battle, Joshua has a very unusual encounter. We're told this in Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Now, any other time somebody had seen a obviously heavenly being like this and fell to their knees, they told him to get up. But this time he told him to take off your sandals from your feet, for where you are standing is holy. Now, there are scholars that have said that this commander of the army of the Lord is the pre-incarnate Jesus. And this is what really fascinated me. We have Joshua, the type of Jesus, meeting the pre-incarnate Jesus, and that floored me. So then here we get to the Battle of Jericho, which really exemplifies Joshua's complete trust in the Lord. Now, God told Joshua to march the army around Jericho 1 time a day for 6 days. And on the 7th day, 7 priests blowing ram's horns, followed by the Ark of the Covenant, were to circle the city 7 times. After the 7th time, the people were to shout to cause the wall to fall. Now, only by complete trust in the Lord would a leader not even question a way to break down a city's walls. Now, one thing that we didn't cover in this was about the spies and Rahab. They were a very important part of this, but we're really focusing on Joshua, as their valiant leader. I purposely left that out for length. So then, okay, Jericho has been defeated, and now the Israelites moved to the city of Ai. But not all went well due to the sin of a man named Achan. Now, at Jericho, the Israelites were told to completely destroy the city, everything in it, everybody except for Rahab and her family, obviously. But Achan, he took some gold and silver and a cloak that he covered. And due to this, Israel was defeated. So Achan was confronted by Joshua, and when Achan confessed his sin, he was stoned, but his stoning had turned the Lord's anger from him. So Joshua and the Israelites were to attack Ai again, and God told Joshua one more time, do not fear and do not be dismayed. This time, like I said, Ai was defeated, but Israel was allowed to take the spoil and cattle. But not everything Joshua did was perfect. In chapter 9, Joshua was deceived into making a covenant by the Gibeonites in order to save themselves. Now, if Joshua had talked with God beforehand, as he did before every battle or every meeting with the enemy, this would never have happened. But because of this, and when it came to light to Joshua, the Gibeonites were punished by being made the servants of Israel from that day forward. Then the next battle for Israel was against the 5 kings of the Amorites, and one of these kings was the king of Jerusalem. Now the Amorites went to make war with the Gibeonites, but because of the covenant that the Israelites swore before God they had made with the city of Gibeon, Joshua and his army marched all night to defend the city. And the Amorites were defeated by the army and by God through large stones and hailstones thrown down by the Lord. And we're told that more people were killed by the hailstones than by the Israelites themselves. There's an amazing part of this battle that is told to us in Joshua chapter 10, verses 12 through 14. At that time Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the sons of Israel, and he said in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? The sun stopped in the midst of heaven, and did not hurry to set about a whole day. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. Now, there were many more battles fought by Israel. All the battles they fought after this, their enemies were defeated, but not all of the enemies in Israel were fought and defeated by Joshua and the Israelites. Joshua had gotten quite old at this time, and God told Joshua, basically, it's time for you to rest. I've got it from here. I will drive out the rest of the ones from the promised land. After this time, God told Joshua to go ahead and allot the land for the 9 tribes and the half tribe of Manasseh. Now the Reubenites and the Gadites had already been given their land east of the Jordan, and the half tribe of Manasseh. But before Joshua's death, he once again addressed the Israelites. His speech reminded them of what all the Lord had done for them up to that point, then told them to choose who to serve. And this is probably one of the most familiar of anything that Joshua said. I've seen this in quite a few places in several homes. It says, "Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." It was soon after this that Joshua died, and he was 110 years old. But Joshua, for whatever reason, unlike Moses, he didn't appoint a successor as his death approached. And as a result of the leadership vacuum, the Israelites began to sin not long after Joshua's death. Rather than completing the conquest, they lived together with the land's previous inhabitants and allowed themselves to be swayed by their neighbors' pagan beliefs. This begins a long period in which the Jews sin, are oppressed by neighboring countries, are saved by a leader or judge, rededicate themselves to God, and eventually sin again. The entire book of Judges details this cycle, and it is not until the founding of the Davidic dynasty in 1 Kings that the nation has permanent leadership again. Now, I mentioned earlier some examples that I have found of Joshua being a type or foreshadowing of Christ. And I found these through a couple of web pages, learnreligions.com and jewishvirtuallibrary.org. The first one says, "What Moses, who represented the law, was unable to do, Joshua achieved when he successfully led the people of God out of the desert to conquer their enemies and enter the promised land. His accomplishments point to the finished work of Christ on the cross, the defeat of Satan's enemy. Satan, the setting on the cross, the defeat of God's enemy, Satan, the setting free of all believers from captivity to sin, and the opening of the way into the promised land of eternity." And Joshua's crossing of the Jordan River was mirrored by Jesus' baptism in it. Now, the third one is kind of iffy as a foreshadowing of Christ, but it was one of them, so I'm going to go ahead and mention it, is that Joshua never married. But we can see that against overwhelming odds, Joshua led the people of Israel in the conquest of the promised land, beginning with the strange and miraculous battle of Jericho. His strong faith caused him to obey no matter how illogical God's commands might seem. Obedience, faith, and dependence on the Lord made him one of Israel's finest and valiant leaders, and he set a brave example for us to follow.